Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. Not used to saying that, Krystal, but it's good to be here.
I'm glad you were handling that part because I definitely would have gotten confused about the day. Nevertheless, we have a great show for you with many interesting stories that are unfolding right now. Some new polling numbers expose just how interested in a stock ban members of the public are, of course, for members of Congress to be able to buy and sell stocks, something we've been tracking here very closely. A movement which really started online. And
this is the first big online movement I've seen in a while.
Has now made it not only into mainstream discourse, but politicians on the right and the left jockeying to be on the right side of this issue, of course, with some major roadblocks in their way. So we'll get into those numbers, which is pretty interesting. Also, Secretary of State Tony Blinken headed for some big meetings with top Russian officials as tensions mount in Ukraine. We will sort out as best we can, given the intense levels of propaganda, what is fact and what is fiction and what the path forward looks like there. Also, a viral video of Congressman Dan Crenshaw kind of losing it when he's challenged by some question over whether it's a young girl or a young woman.
Yes.
But
well,
definitely
it's still revealing as to how these people think about themselves and how they look at their constituents.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So we will tell you about that. Also, the latest effort to censor Joe Rogan and his podcast falls on its face yet again. And this is interesting, actually. We have a Dr. Vinay Prasad on, someone who you brought to my attention, who has some really nuanced and fact-based analyses of vaccines, the benefits, the potential side effects, how we should be thinking about all of this. He's just up with a lengthy 6,000-word post sorting through a variety of the claims that are actually made on Joe Rogan's podcast. In our opinion, if you have objections to the things that are being said on his podcast or any other platform, this is the way to deal with it. You say, here's the claim, here's the truth, here's the evidence, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. So we're gonna have Dr. Prasad on to help us sort through some of those claims. But we wanted to start with a rather noteworthy moment from Paul Begala on CNN, where he analyzes the real problem for the Democratic Party. Let's take a listen.
Paul, let me start with you and the words of the daughter-in-law of Martin Luther King Jr., Andrea Waters King. This is what she told Politico, quote, "What we have seen with President Biden is what happens when he puts the full force and power behind an issue like infrastructure. What we want to see is that same power and passion being put behind voting rights." Do you think that's fair criticism? Did President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers. Okay, I read the most amazing essay today from Andy Young. Andy is former mayor of Atlanta, former UN ambassador, and more importantly, probably the closest confidant and aide to Dr. King. He told this story. December of 1964, Andy Young and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. go to see Lyndon Johnson to push him for a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, "I can't do it. I used all my power to get the Civil Rights Act done last year. I don't have the power to push Congress any further on voting rights." As they left the White House, Andy Young's words, he said, I asked Dr. King what he thought. He said, "I think we got to go get the president some power." And so you know what they did? They organized, these are Andy Young's words, we mobilized the churches, the universities, the labor unions, the business community, a coalition of people of goodwill. In other words, those of us who want to save voting rights, we need to get to work. I do think Biden is putting everything behind this, but he needs better followers. So he needs all of us in the game as well.
I remember.
We need better followers.
The problem isn't Democrats' leaders, it's that they have bad followers. I mean, so for those keeping track at home, you'll remember Paul Begala and James Carville, they were famously it's the economy stupid guys. Now they're the it's you stupid. Apparently that is their approach.
After becoming filthy
say,
rich.
I have to say too, this sentiment is not just with Paul Begala. This is the dominant sentiment within the elites of the Democratic Party. It's something that Barack Obama says a little bit more eloquently, but he tends to be like, you know, what happens when you all fail to show up for us is then we get these Republicans in, and then that's really bad. So even the fact that we disappointed you means you still got to show up for us. And it is this attitude of total contempt for apparently like 90% of the country, that is a big part of the reason that the Democrats are in the terrible straits that they ultimately are. I mean, it started with Hillary Clinton and her basket of deplorables, which apparently was about just a segment of the Trump base, right? Then that quickly expanded to include anyone who voted for Donald Trump is evil and bad and wrong, et cetera. Well, now it's just the whole country that is unworthy of the wonderful, enlightened Democratic Party, according to Paul Begala. And one more thing that I will say on this. Whatever you thought of the George Floyd protest, it is undeniable that we just had the largest protest movement in history. So to be like, wait, why are you all just sitting on your butts and not doing anything is just absurdly insane, given that the history that we've lived here just in the past couple of years.
I think that's a good point. And it's a big sentiment which dominates the very top of the party. And the disconnect is one which is just so astronomical. You know, I think it was yesterday, you and I were talking in the premium discussion, Post Your Radar, about Democratic donors. But I think this is an important discussion for everybody to hear as well. I was just looking at some of the behind the scenes news. And yesterday, Chuck Schumer held a meeting with like the ultra rich Democratic Party donors. And they were like, you got to do something on voting rights, Chuck, like this, and this. Once again, you think what you want about voting rights, but why exactly is the entire country's national political elite focused on voting rights and the filibuster reform when the economy is the #1 issue with gas prices for all Americans, second to COVID? Neither of those things are being talked here at the top. Well, the party's ultra rich. They're doing fine. Not just fine, they're richer than ever. They are identity politics obsessed people who this is their like crowning achievement. And who does the political establishment work for? I really have come to believe that the Democratic Party donor base is actually more out of step with its own base and pretty much the entire country than any donor base that exists out there. And it's a very detrimental thing. These are the tech billionaires. These are the Wall Street billionaires. These are people in Hollywood. I mean, they run our society, but they're also running one of these major parties. And the key to understand about this is not the followers. The followers aren't the problem. It is the leaders and it's the funders. And the people are revolting, Krystal. Go ahead and put this up there on the screen, which is that we now have the latest Wall Street Journal poll here. Hispanic voters are now evenly split between parties. Republicans have made rapid gains amongst a crucial voting demographic that has looked at Democrats. But just go ahead and look at that level of support here. We're talking about 45% Trump and 46% Biden for if the 2024 election were held today, for whom Hispanics would vote. That's all adults. Look at men. It's 56%. 56. So the only thing that really evens it out is the disparate treatment between Hispanic men and Hispanic women. But that is just a stunning figure. And in terms of the generic ballot, which candidate you would support for Congress, the GOP is coming out on top at 44-41, Krystal. I've never seen anything like this before.
I mean, we should say, I do want to put in the caveat that it's a pretty small sample size. This was 1,500 registered voters, but only 165 Hispanic voters.
Okay.
And there is a margin of error of 8 points. However, this tracks with other data that we've seen. The Glenn Youngkin victory. Again,
50-50.
Small sample size in terms of what they were able to glean from the Hispanic electorate, but the numbers come out very similarly. Of course, we saw, and we had a lot of numbers for how much of a significant shift there was among Hispanic voters towards Trump in the last election. So it's a small sample size, take it with a grain of salt, but because it does match up with other trends that we've seen, I think people should really take it seriously here. And to go back to the point about, Paul Begala and the leaders versus the followers, I think you're exactly right when you say the problem with the Democratic Party is not the followers. In fact, the problem with the country isn't the American people.
It is not, no.
It's the people who are here in Washington who run the show. It's the donor class. It's the elites who control Wall Street and corporate America. They're the ones who are the radicals, and they are the ones who are standing in the way of an agenda that could be wildly popular. Put party labels aside, and we're about to cover this in the next block, the stock ban. It's over 70% of the country is like, Of course, members of Congress shouldn't be engaging in insider trading. Like, obviously, we're basically all in agreement on that. We're in agreement on paid sick leave. We're in agreement on prescription drug price reform. We're in agreement on affordable care. And yes, Medicare for All continues to be pretty darn popular. There is a popular consensus agenda out there waiting to be implemented that the American people are totally on board with. $15 minimum wage. Another great example.
Approval.
Easy majority right there. What is blocking this progress? It is not the followers. It is certainly not the base of the Democratic Party. It's people like Paul Begala and his buddies here in Washington that prevent any sort of change from happening. And they want you to believe that it's the followers, that it's the American people. They're too dumb, they're too racist, they're too this, they're too that. But actually, if we just picked random names out of the telephone book to sit in Congress in these people's chairs, I am 100% certain we would get way better results than what we're ultimately getting. And by the way, this attitude, again, from Begala, which comes from a lot of the Democratic elites, and people are not stupid, they see it and they feel it, has translated into dismal approval ratings for Joe Biden, who has now got to be counted as one of the least effectual presidents in our lifetimes. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from Quinnipiac. Biden's approval rating in this one poll drops to a new low of 33%. Okay? Do you know what Donald Trump's lowest approval rating was, his entire presidency?
35.
34.
Ah, there we go.
Biden now has a lower approval. Now listen, again, it's one poll. I looked at the average of polls on Real Clear Politics. Right now his approval is running about 42 to 52. He's 10 points underwater. But this is a dire sign of how badly this presidency has gone. We talked yesterday about how many voters feel like Democrats and Joe Biden are not focused on their concerns. And I don't know how anyone feels like these people are focused on their concerns. What are they even focused on except for like making a speech and posturing about voting rights, which they have no plan to actually implement, even if that is your number one issue, which, by the way, when we look at the polling, number one issues are healthcare, economy, and climate change. So given that state of affairs, I don't know how anyone feels like these people are really in touch with their concerns unless your top concern is like Lin-Manuel Miranda coming out to celebrate January 6th anniversary.
If they dropped all this voting rights stuff, they spent a month on trying to lower the price of gas. They may not even have to succeed, just try. They would do better in the polls. But no, look, these people are idiots. And I think that that's the part that we really have to focus on. And just so you guys, have an understanding of how broken the system is, do you know the prospective GOP senator, John Sununu, who was the governor of New Hampshire, was considering a run for the Senate. But he gave an interesting interview. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. So here's what he said as to why he did not run. He goes, well, for the most part, they are content, as in the GOP senators, with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It was clear. We just have to hold the line for 2 years. Okay, so I'm just going to be a roadblock for 2 years? That's not what I do. The governor said that the message from every GOP senator he chatted with, and chatted with most of them, was that they plan to do little more with the majority they are fighting to win this November than obstruct Joe Biden until hopefully 2024 ushers a Republican into the White House. It bothered me that they were okay with that. Sorry, it was Chris Sununu, not John Sununu. But I think it's very important to understand here that the incentives on both sides here appear to be that the Republican Party has no mandate, at least a part of what it's given, than to obstruct. The Democratic Party, they kind of had a mandate. I would say Biden had a mandate on vaccines and on economic recovery. Vaccines, he certainly did well. And actually, it's the only area in which he has above 50% approval. It's like 52% on vaccine distribution. Great. In terms of handling the pandemic, like 30. So he failed in terms of his broader mission, but in that one broad way. But on the economy, obviously, that didn't work out. And when you have just such a total, I don't even want to say gridlock because that almost understates the problem. When you just have such titanic forces, both at the very, very top, not actually working in order to make life better, things are falling apart out there. No wonder people are angry, social dissatisfaction. The meta-sociological trends are moving in a direction which is terrible. depression, suicide, the deaths of despair, fentanyl overdose. It's like housing prices are out of control. I'm going to be doing something on that tomorrow. Every facet basic of American life, I said this yesterday, is becoming miserable. And what are they doing? I mean, it's almost like they're responding it by trying to make it more miserable for the everyday population because the people at the top are doing quite well.
Yeah, I mean, the point of showing that thing from Sununu, who was a top recruit, who actually people were pretty surprised when he took a pass.
When he decided
and that
to
would have
go.
been an almost gimme pickup for Republicans in the Senate because he is popular in the state of New Hampshire, which is, you know, it's a swing state. It's a tough state for the Republicans to ultimately win. The reason to show that is to say it's utterly pathetic you all are losing to these people. Like, they're upfront about the fact that they literally don't stand for anything, that they're not. What is the agenda that they're running on?
Nothing.
In the site, they're literally upfront saying we don't have an agenda. We're just not them, and they are very likely to win not just a majority, but it's possible that if things continue to go their way, they'll win the largest majority in a century. Now flip that around to last year, about this time, a little bit before this time, when Democrats had a very significant partisan advantage in terms of party identification. Well, what were they talking about relentlessly have had? Vaccine distribution and checks.
Yeah.
Checks, direct stimulus checks, something that was measurable, something that they were dramatically on the right side of, something where the Republican Party looked completely on a step with the American people. Well, there are a ton of issues that I just named where you still have that position where you could be on the right side here, on the 80% or 70% side of public support and put Republicans in a tough spot, but you're not doing that. You're not even coming close to doing that. It's insane. And of course, now they've basically like given up on any kind of an economic agenda. It's more comfortable for them. And it's like what the donor class wants to hear for them to sort of posture on voting rights, something else that they have no chance, no plan to ultimately get through. And so ultimately, you know, these disastrous numbers that are coming out, it's not the fault of your followers, it's the fault of you guys. And so placing blame anywhere else is just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, that's well said. And let's give them an example of what they could vote for. Do it tomorrow. Go ahead. It'll be very popular.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.